and assimilated them to that American dream and that American way of life, that we are the great, prosperous, and free nation that we are. But inviting an invasion, and we have not just allowed invasion, we have invited it in many ways, will destroy us. We must, as a state, provide additional assistance, resources, and revenue to local law enforcement along the border so that they can ensure that all traffic coming across our southern border comes through the legal ports of entry. And that will restore the rule of law to that whole region.
So how do you do that?
You begin to recognize that health care is not the primary role of state government. You begin to shift those health care resources that we're spending on health care over to law enforcement, criminal justice, where they ought to be. That is a responsibility of state government. You begin to say to the folks who are looking to the state for health care, not the state's job to meet those needs. You're going to have to take some responsibility for your own care. You're going to have to work with yourself, your family, your community, and your church to have your health care needs met. Your government can't do that for you. Your government's job is to take care of justice first, law enforcement, infrastructure, transportation needs, water issues in Texas, and the application and the insurance that all laws are applied justly to everyone that lives here. That's the proper role of state government. We've got to remove ourselves from some of these areas where we have spent a lot of resources on things that we shouldn't be as a state providing.
If you were fortunate enough to win the primary, Democrats will say you're pretty hard-hearted. Take away the health care, send, essentially keep people who don't belong here away. How would you, as a general practical matter, if you were, would you soften your tone at all?
Not at all. I'm a registered nurse. I am compassionate and sympathetic to the hurting. But socializing the health care, really, look at all the models for that, causes less availability of service, poorer service, fewer providers. If we really care about the hurting and the sick, we'll recognize that government cannot meet those needs. The most conservative thing to do, the thing that will most likely ensure great service, the continuing great service that we have in the medical community across Texas. We've got the best medical facilities in the world right here in Texas. If we want to ensure that that continues, we've got to back government out of it and allow the free market. Americans and Texans are the most charitable people in the world. Get the government off of their back and let them provide charitable service. They will provide it when it is needed and when it is necessary. But when the government mandates it, fewer services are available and everybody hurts.
Now, are you running against Rick Perry or Kay Bailey Hutchison at this point?
I am running for freedom and prosperity and leadership in Texas. And I guess I'm thinking that I'm championing the message that people are jumping on board with. And Kay and Rick are going to have to catch me. I'm the most conservative in this race, and I've got great ideas for Texas. They're not my ideas. They're the ideas that the founders talked about. Recognize a limited federal government. Recognize a sovereign state that uses nullification and interposition to keep Washington in Washington and doing what it is constitutionally mandated to do, leaving those other decisions to Texas, talking about stuff like, let's recognize that the EPA has no business in Texas. We have an energy sector here, we have an ag sector here, and if those sectors need regulating, Texans should do that. We've got to begin to back the EPA out of our industry here. We've got to recognize that competition, the free market, provides the best products and services available to the most people. That applies in healthcare, in energy, in agriculture, and in education. We've created an education monopoly here. We're stealing from our children. We're stealing from our future generations knowledge and training that they deserve so that we can continue to be prosperous and free. We've got to break down those sacred walls that we've erected around that monopoly called public education and get competition back in there. Those are ideas that appeal to people. Kay and Rick are going to have to catch me on that because they're fresh out.
But that Washington elephant you're talking about is already in the room.
It is. It is here in everything that we do. So initially in this campaign, I was talking about figuring out strategically where do we attack that cancerous growth to do the most good with the least amount of resources. You know, where can we get the biggest bang for our buck, if you will, on that? But as we saw that health care bill coming, I have kind of moved to this place. There is a line in the sand in Texas, and Washington's not coming one more inch. Not one more inch into Texas outside of the Constitution. We've got to fight them on every overreach. And then we've got to gradually back. We're not going to undo, either at the federal level or at the state level, all of the provision that the state does. I'm not advocating cutting off all state health care service. That's a third of our budget. People would really hurt, but we've got to gradually back that out. When we begin to champion that message, when we begin to look seriously at a constitutional republic, at a just rule of law, and at a limited government, we'll have great wisdom and ideas coming. That's already happening all over the state, and I'm looking forward to being the one that's carrying that banner for Texas.
Are you, I haven't heard you mention secession like the governor idly did, but you sound like you want to be more conservative than he is, so I think it's a fair question.
I think it was disingenuous political posturing on his part to toss out secession. Read the founders' work and understand Thomas Jefferson said it is the unquestionable right of the state to determine when the federal government steps beyond the Constitution. And the rightful remedy, the proper remedy, is nullification and interposition. If he was serious about protecting Texas state sovereignty, he would have been using nullification and interposition as tools in the last 9 years. He's never even mentioned the term. Montana nullified Real ID. 10 other states have introduced nullification language against the nationalization of our health care. Texas is sitting on our hands under his leadership. We ought to be encouraging our state representatives and senators today to be crafting the language so that as soon as that bill passes in the Congress, as soon as the president signs it, we are ready to call a special session in Texas, nullify that federal health care bill. We've given Attorney General Greg Abbott 2 causes of action in the federal court to gain an injunction against the IRS to stop, because once that bill is signed, the taxation starts immediately, possibly as early as January of 2010. We need an injunction in the federal court to prevent the IRS and the 111 other federal agencies from getting into Texas health care until such time as that case, on the grounds that it's unconstitutional, on the grounds that it violates the sovereignty of Texas and laws that we passed here, because we've called the special session and nullified that. Until that is litigated, we want an injunction against those federal agencies so that they're not oppressing our people and taking more tax money from Texans. That's how you protect freedom and prosperity in Texas. The governor out to lunch on that issue.
What about Senator Hutchinson?
I haven't heard the senator talking about those ideas either. And again, this goes back to reading our history and understanding the U.S. Constitution. The best blueprint ever laid for the creation of a free and prosperous society, ignored by those in leadership. We've got to pay attention to those ideas. The Constitution of the state of Texas is in many ways similar to our own federal Constitution. We have 3 branches of government here. They each have a proper role to play, but they have a limited role in this great society. We've got to recognize that business and industry, communities and churches have a tremendous role to play, individuals and families as well. Recognize the proper role of limited government and begin to say to folks, I hear your pain, I hear your problem, but government can't solve it for you. Let's help you find the answer to that in your own community and within your own family and your own self.
At the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned Second Amendment, and haven't heard anything since.
Private property ownership, gun ownership, essential elements of freedom. We had a debate in the last legislative session about open carry. I think if we were truly concerned about safety and security of people, we would recognize a couple of things. Gun registration has been used for only one purpose throughout history. It is gun confiscation. We ought not be talking so much about open carry as we ought to be talking about ending gun registration. We ought to have our leaders recognizing in the wake of the tragedy at Fort Hood that that's not the first time that's happened. It's not going to be the last. Sympathy and condolence to those families, but if we cared about the safety of people in Texas, we would say this: no amount of military presence, no amount of police presence is going to protect us from one deranged individual intent on doing harm